With me in the cafe now is Christan Hummel. Welcome, Christan.
Hi there.
Christan is known as how would you describe yourself? You work with clearing world pollution and geopathic stress, is that right?
Well, we're part of a global team that has been both doing trainings and actually implementing what we've called World Pollution Clearing Project that has been done successfully in several countries around the world now.
Well, let's try to orient our listeners to exactly what it is you're working with. I know you work with devas, so and I know you're working with a special kind of pollution also. And so let's try to get some definitions.
Well, the
what
type
is
of
it?
pollution that we're working with is both air pollution and water pollution. We've seen results with both of those.
Okay.
And it's using the technology developed by a man named Slim Sperling. And they are tools that work on principles of resonance, employing sacred geometry that goes back to some of the principles that were used in ancient Egypt and certain types of alchemy that essentially produce fields that are superconductors through nothing more than wound copper wire in certain lengths and in certain geometries with each other.
Now, this is a really fascinating topic to me because I remember as a young child I had a crystal radio set and I had to build it. And it's a very simple operation, and one of the major elements is a coil that you wind around like a toilet tube, a toilet paper tube or something like that, and you have a crystal or something, and some headphones. It's real simple, and you can pull a radio signal right out of the air.
Exactly.
But I'm looking at the plans for. I was at your website. Let me just say, you've got a wonderful website, and it gives a little bit of information about how these devices are made, and from what I can tell, they really don't have to be powered. So we're just talking about a coil of a certain length, and well, you describe it.
Well, Nikola Tesla, back in the earlier part of this century, was showing that with certain configurations of simply coiled wires, you can generate all sorts of effects, including powering aircraft and creating anti-gravity devices, etc. And he was shut down by the powers that be because it wasn't economically feasible to do that. But the technology still exists, and this technology has been employed in the tools that we're using that have many applications, everything from use for health practitioners to, as we said, clearing up the environment. And there's no moving parts, there's no electricity, or it's not plugged into anything. It is simply the shape of the wire, the type of wire used, the lengths that are used, that produce certain fields that create what are called resonance patterns. And those are what are generating the effects in terms of clearing the atmosphere.
Well, let's talk about what these things are capable of doing. I know in the reading and research I did on the web, there was a couple of experiments that were conducted fairly recently in clearing pollution in a couple of major cities. Do you want to talk about one of those?
Yeah, well, there have been several cities that have been done. The most recent is in Melbourne in Australia. A man with the EPA there has been conducting a study since November and is getting results. But the results from a study up in Vancouver, which was a 3-month study, have shown great reductions in pollution as well as crime. And in over 5 major cities where we've done this program, we've seen reductions in crime as well as high as 30%. Now, there's a nationwide reduction of crime that's happened over the last 5 years of between 5 and 10%. But we're talking a 30% reduction within a couple of months of instituting this program.
Now, let's talk about that aspect because, here the purpose supposedly is to clear pollution, and it's kind of weird enough to think that a few people working with these coils and thought patterns and so forth can clear a significant amount of pollution out of a really polluted city. But then to also add that crime is a reduction in crime is a byproduct. Do you have any idea how this works?
Well, we have an idea of some of the correlations, and from that, after seeing a number of correlations, we can make some educated guesses, but it would take more scientific research to actually be able to prove the causal relationship. But what we see is a correlation between what is called geopathic stress, which are distorted energy fields that exist within the Earth that affect emotions, health, human behavior, etc., and the removal of that geopathic stress either through the use of the tools or through more metaphysical means such as working with the devas or meditation, etc. So we've seen strong correlations between the reduction of the geopathic stress and the crime rate being reduced. Now it's fairly well documented, not just in metaphysical communities but in scientific and medical communities as well as law enforcement, that there's a strong relationship between what we might consider unhealthy emotional behavior in humanity and the moon cycles.
Right. I think that's well known.
The word lunacy comes from, the moon. And if you go into any emergency room on a full moon night, you'll see they're totally crazy and packed to the gills. And that our own emotional bodies are affected by the energies that we are immersed in this planet. This planet is a jumble of various energetic fields, and we're not immune to them. We're affected by them. And what has been shown with the geopathic stress fields is that they are aggravated or exacerbated by the moon cycles. That on the times of the full moon, that the geopathic stress zones actually swell to 2 to 3 times their normal size. And there's a tremendous amount of research that's been done in the medical and scientific communities showing the correlation between this geopathic stress and health, as well as learning behavior and various other kinds of physical ailments. Almost everything, well, certainly there's documentation correlating it to cancer. There's a 97% correlation between being in the geopathic stress zones and incident of cancer.
Now, how wide would these geopathic stress zones be, and how widely apart are they usually spaced? Is it a regular kind of occurrence?
It does depend on location. As a general rule, the zones are, or we could refer to them as lines, but they're really more like sheets or walls that go up for thousands of feet.
How wide would they be?
Approximately 1 inch wide.
Oh, they're really narrow. Okay.
Yes, but they have a zone of influence that's about 2 feet wide.
I see.
So you would actually feel the influence of that. But if you were on a place where those two lines crossed, that on that part of your body, for instance, you were sleeping there, it actually weakens the cellular structure of the body. It's been found that bacteria, yeast, mold grow at faster rates in those areas where there is geopathic stress. Farmers have employed this to their advantage by placing compost piles in places where there are numerous geopathic zones. And it weakens the immune system, which obviously leaves us more susceptible to all sorts of diseases.
So it's a sort of energy that works in breaking things down.
It does. It's what Wilhelm Reich would have described as dead orgon energy, POR. It's from a quantum physics point of view, it's what they consider a left-hand or chaotic spin on the quantum level.
Well,
how
would modern science, quote unquote, look at something like this? Is there any sort of work being done that would quantify what you're doing?
There's, according to the work of Hans Nieper, who was a scientist in Germany, he's done study with tachyon fields and has shown that the geopathic zones are really a shear zone between two tachyon fields. So that's another way of looking at it. Whatever conceptual model you use, the result is basically the same. It's been found that test scores in schools have increased where the geopathic stress has been neutralized. It's been found that As we've said, when it's been neutralized in areas like whole cities, that crime rate has gone down. It's very common in households that relationships improve, that if there's been conflict or difficulties in communication, that in blocking or clearing the geopathic stress zones, that there are better relationships. So it has effects on in all aspects of a person's life: health, relationships, human behavior, even finances. We found in Brazil, when we did a geopathic clearing of the downtown area of Sao Paulo, which is their financial city for all of Brazil. It would be like Manhattan or New York
Right.
for us. And in the downtown area was the financial district of that city. And the Brazilian economy was really teetering and really failing. And when we did the geopathic clearing in Brazil, the very next day it took an unexpected recovery. The market recovered, and the exchange rate went from being approximately 40% on the dollar when I was there to a week later being almost 1-to-1 with the dollar. So their economy had improved to that degree.
They should hire you.
Really
You got to charge a percentage.
Percentage point. Well, it is interesting. There are people who do this as a living.
No kidding.
They clear the geopathic, much like feng shui consultants. And there is a branch of feng shui that does discuss geopathic stress. They deal with it a little differently.
What's it called? Geomancy?
No, they actually refer to it as geopathic stress. There are branches of Chinese feng shui that talk about dealing with the geopathic stress in a house. They might also term it, that there's negative qi energy. But they work with crystals and with coiled copper, surprisingly enough.
Well,
placing those in different places on the property. American Indians have done for a long time land blessing ceremonies
sure.
to heal the energies of the land of an area. Almost every indigenous tribe that I've become aware of has had some ritual, some form of addressing the distorted patterns in the earth by whatever name they give it.
Now, if we didn't have these distorted patterns called geopathic stress, what would the pattern look like?
Well, a part of it is natural. A part of it is sort of like the Earth's digestive system. Its way of moving toxins around in the system, fault zones, sinkholes, even certain ore deposits, etc. But a good part of it is a human contribution through electromagnetic emissions, radios, nothing personal, cell phones, microwave, satellite, etc. And then simply human emotion. All the wars, all the conflict, that unresolved emotion goes somewhere, and it's actually absorbed and stored by the earth.
So that's really the concern that all the sort of natural people have, that they're actually feeling this contribution of negative energy coming from humanity, and we have so many humans now all emitting these stressful emotions. So Mother Earth is absorbing all this and sort of in a way feeding it back to us,
and sometimes in the form of weather patterns.
I would guess that, yes.
That in what we would things like tornadoes and hurricanes and fires and volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, all of these things, we've seen reductions in those, sometimes quite dramatic, with the clearing of the geopathic stress of an area.
I thought that for a long time, that our emotions, our negative emotions, actually produced the weird weather. But I couldn't prove it. I just felt that,
It seems that there's a considerable contribution. I believe that there are also other forces involved that HAARP couldn't be ruled out entirely.
Right. Well, let's talk about devas now. And I read in your article on the web that you started becoming interested in devas at the tender age of 14.
Yeah.
Why don't you go back to age 14 and tell us what...
I don't think any of us wants to go back to age 14.
Well, in a metaphorical sense, what was it that turned you on at that age?
Well, I was really fortunate. I didn't know it because I was 14 years old. You don't know anything at that age usually. But I happened to be blessed with some very exceptional teachers, and I've come to find how rare that is. That they just had absolutely impeccable integrity and very gifted inwardly in their own inner development and psychic abilities, and they were able to see the devas, and as well they had a very strong background with theosophical teachings. They had been with Alice Bailey and the Arcane School when it had started, and so they were well steeped in the intellectual side of it as well. And so I was introduced to that by people who knew, and since I totally trusted who they were as people, I trusted what they had to see about it, even though I myself couldn't see it or verify it. And so I just grew up without really so much questioning it, but just feeling that it was something that was real.
Have you had any... I was trying to find out when in your childhood or growing up you had some direct experience where you felt that, yes, there are devas. Not just because someone told me so or
I
read it
don't
in a
think
book.
that really happened until I was around 21. One of the teachers who was clairvoyant and telepathic, she had died. And at that time, one of the Devic masters who had been working with our group began to communicate telepathically with several members of our group. And that was when I had my first experience with that, 1980.
I'm sure many of our listeners are probably wondering what the heck we're talking about and what are devas. So,
well, the devas are the elemental beings or lives or the intelligence of nature. But we have to broaden our definition of what we consider nature, because it's not just the trees and the rocks and the rivers. It's everything. It's absolutely everything. If you think about it, there's nothing that exists on this planet that doesn't at some point come from this planet. Now, it's been rearranged and reorganized, perhaps, to look like something we would never recognize as being nature, like styrofoam or something.
Mm-hmm.
But it is from nature. And there is a consciousness or a life intelligence within all form, no exception whatsoever. And
you mean even rocks and
everything,
things like that, metal?
Everything. There's no exception.
So these people working with crystals aren't so far out after all.
Well, I mean, you may think them far out, but it is in fact true that a crystal has a consciousness. A crystal is a life form. It is intelligent. Now, whether or not we're able to communicate with that or understand that, that's another matter. There are certain life forms that resonate more closely with our own original pattern, and so it's easier for us to get impressions or feelings or communications or however you want to term it, but it doesn't mean that it's more alive than anything else. Every single thing, I mean, there isn't any, your computer, your car, the rocks, everything is alive. Now, whether or not we can access that life it is another matter, but it doesn't make it any less alive.
What kind of experiences have you had, let's say, with a crystal or some so-called inanimate object that proved to you that you felt, hey, there's something going on here, something I can use or do something with?
Well, a lot. I'm trying to think of one. It's been over a series of years. It hasn't happened just like boom one day.
Wasn't like lightning struck.
Talking to you, but I'd have to say I was really, really skeptical for about the first, 20 years. And it's really only about the last 5 years that I've started to drop that skepticism and just trust it. And still there are times that it comes up, like, oh gosh, I don't know, am I making this up? But
the reason I ask is because you're probably a little more ahead of the curve here.
I don't think so, and I really would tend to want not to classify myself in that category because we all have an opportunity to have a relationship with nature that is two-way, co-creative. And when I say nature, I mean everything. It's the billboards as you're driving down the street. I mean, here's a beautiful example. My sister, when she, before she got married to her husband, they fell madly in love, and it was so deep and so quick between the two of them that it scared them both. And his last name was Dorman, and she just asked inwardly to be given a sign that this was the right thing. And seconds later, she sees this tire sign that says Dorman Tires. I mean, now that's coincidence when you see it happen once.
Mm-hmm.
But when things like that happen all the time, it tells you that we're living in a world that's responding to us. It's not us here and the world out there. We're part of a closed system, and the whole thing is constantly responding to our thoughts and our feelings. And if we look at it that way, the world is always communicating with us, always.
Mm-hmm.
It's just we walk around usually thinking about paying our bills or the traffic or getting from point A to point B, and we're not being sensitive to the signs. But it can be clouds. It can be cloud patterns. It can be birds that suddenly just take off and circle overhead 3 times. It can be a clock, face. It's so many different ways, and this is all nature.
Okay.
All of that is what I'm calling nature. It's not just the trees and the rivers and things. It's Mother Earth. It's Earth talking with us.
So how do the devas work? What kind of a role do they have, and how would you define devas in general and what they do?
Well, there are various classifications or organization patterns of the Devic kingdom, and they are a kingdom that is parallel to humanity. And the ones that are most commonly referred to or thought of as devas would be the nymphs and the elves and the fairies and the gnomes and the sprites, those kinds of things. And that is one classification of the Devic kingdom that we would consider nature spirits or elementals. And they have a certain level of consciousness that's almost like a group consciousness, like a herd instinct, or in a sense. And as the devas themselves become more developed in their consciousness, they become more individualized or singularized, like a tree spirit would have a more developed consciousness than, say, a garden sprite or something.
Okay.
But then beyond that, there are actually Devic masters, like the Devic being that resides in Mount Shasta is a Devic master.
All right.
And could easily communicate with people if they just went into a meditation and just quieted their mind and just asked for some impression.
I have interviewed 2 women who have written books of their experiences with either elves or leprechauns, as the case was, and they had some very remarkable experiences, which I'll save for another show. Maybe we'll interview them again, but I think there's a great reality to this, and these aren't people who are uneducated. These are people with high degrees and probably a lot more to lose by speaking up, than you know what I'm saying. But they did it anyway, and their lives have improved. Let's say that. So you have this elemental kingdom, and then you have that's part of the Devic kingdom.
And everything that has a thought associated with it has a Devic consciousness that embodies that thought. So anything that we would think of, cyberspace, that's a thought. Is it a thing? Can you hold it?
No.
Can you define it? Where is it? Where does it begin? Where does it end?
Christan?
It has Devic consciousness.
We have to take a break here, unfortunately. We're talking with Christan Hummel about clearing geopathic stress. And I know this is going to be more interesting as we go along, so stay with us. This is Steve Fryer. You're listening to the Millennium Cafe, and we are in the cafe with Christan Hummel. And we are talking about clearing geopathic stress and pollution. And before the break, we were talking about devas and nature spirits and things like that. And I understand that the work that you do in pollution clearing really is less technical than the work of Slim Sperling. And he has come up with some devices, which we mentioned earlier, that help assist people in getting into the right frame of mind, or how would you describe it? I know you probably don't need these tools, but you tell me. I don't know.
We consider them transitional tools because
Okay.
they're something that are external to us, and so they are a technology of sorts, but they have no moving parts. They work just on the energy that exists all around in the universe as it is.
And there's plenty of that.
There is. There is. Just in even one little thimble full of atoms, there's energy to power the world.
So in a way, we're really working with what they call zero-point energy.
Yeah.
Is that right?
That has been shown to be true. They actually have shown that by putting one of the caduceus coiled rings of copper that he makes around a glass of water, just instantaneously the water begins to fluoresce and emit light, and that's been measured by very sophisticated electronics equipment. And the amount of energy it would take as an input to cause the electrons of the water molecule to jump in orbit in order to cause it to emit a photon and emit light is absolutely enormous. And yet there's no apparent energy input except for this copper ring that's going around a glass of water.
Well, it sounds like we're dealing with a slightly different kind of energy than most of us are used to thinking about. Mm-hmm. In terms of, say, the radio transmitter, you might have 1 kilowatt, which would be like 1,000 watts, or 10,000 or 50,000 or 100,000 on a really large radio station. But, that takes a lot of juice from a big generator, somewhere, like the Hoover Dam. Mm-hmm. But here you're talking about something that is working to help clear pollution without plugging it into the wall at all.
Exactly. And it's just a reverse. It's very small amounts of input of energy create large energy output. And it's primarily because the rings and the tools themselves have been shown to be superconductors. Mm-hmm. And normally, or the conventional thinking about superconducting fields is that they're created by extremely low temperature. Well, it's been discovered that they also are created by a combination of certain metals in certain geometric patterns and lengths. And so this has a lot of implications. But it's essentially providing almost like a portal between fourth dimensional or tachyon energy and this third dimensional reality. So it's drawing energy from that 0 point, as physicists would think of it, and organizing it so that it can be used on this physical plane. Now, one of the reasons that it has a capacity to do something as phenomenal as clear pollution is simply resonance. That, in a word, is why. That everything moving together at the same drum beat has a very strong power. Mm-hmm. And one of the principles of superconducting fields is that they act as one. So when one molecule does something, it's like the Borg, they all act as one. Mm-hmm. And so you can put a vibratory rate or frequency into that field, and all of the molecules in that field begin to move to it. So it takes as little input as what can be generated from a Sony Walkman, certain sound frequencies in that field, to literally get the pollution molecules to dance to a different beat and convert their alignment with each other into non-polluting elements. It's that simple.
Well, I had read in your web pages, what's the website called again?
www.earthtransitions.com.
Earth Transitions, right. That you, a group of people got together and worked not only in Mexico City, but also in Denver.
Yeah.
What happened in Denver?
In Denver, it was pretty amazing. It was their first ever experiment with what is called the harmonizer, which is a combination of 3 of these rings that we were talking about and a sound frequency applied to that superconducting field. And in Denver, they had 10 people with each of having a harmonizer and each having a sound system applied to that. And simultaneously, they applied the sound for 1 hour and then just stopped and watched to see what would happen, because it was the first time they tested it out.
No, you said sound system. What kind of a sound system were they using?
Walkman.
A Walkman?
With a specific tape this tape was called environmental clearing. It turned out it was the frequencies of water that had been scanned by a microwave emission scanner.
Could you hear that tape?
Yeah, it sounds like, Slim calls it's like a fly stuck in a spider's web.
Oh, so it doesn't sound like a waterfall or anything like that?
No, because it's not actually the sound of water. It's as if you took a picture of water with a microwave scan and then converted that into a waveform and converted that into an audio signal.
So they just played that speaker, I guess, the output of that sound, that tape.
Into the harmonizer.
And it looks like a ring or a coil?
Well, it's a series of intersecting rings. It's 3 intersecting rings that form like a globe, that form a spherical field that goes out 15 miles in diameter all directions.
Wow.
And because it's a superconductive field, as I said, all the molecules within that field, it's called the Bose-Einstein condensate, is the principle in physics.
I love it.
But they all act as one. They all act together in unison. And so that frequency of the environmental clearing tape that they used was then put throughout that field and established a new resonance pattern, which was like a new drum beat that the molecules began to align to. Well, what happened visually, what they experienced, was they saw the traditional brown cloud of pollution that had been in Denver for years, causing them to be in a serious rating in their pollution rating.
Right.
They saw it vanish within an hour. And
Jeez.
The weathermen got on the news and said it's so clear you can see Utah, and they didn't know why. And so that was their first experiment, and for a month they saw that the effect of that 1 hour of synchronized playing of those harmonizers and the tape produced that effect. Well, it just so happened that they were also placed along the Golden Fault, the fault line that ran up along the mountain there. And we have found since that these major geopathic lines, not just the little 1-inch ones, but the major lines that are several hundred feet wide, that happened to be along the fault line there. So they were also transmuting the energy of that geopathic fault. So we have found that to just randomly have 10 harmonizers strung throughout a city, you may or may not see that same effect. But whenever they have placed the harmonizers in a place where it is on these major geopathic lines, the effects are very dramatic. We saw in Cape Town, South Africa, within 30 minutes, we were up on a hill looking at the pollution down in the valley, and within 30 minutes of doing the geopathic clearing for that area, it cleared right up. I mean, people who knew nothing about this were talking about it. It was just, I don't know, it's like somebody just took a hose and just wiped it clear.
That's amazing.
So there's a very, now they already had harmonizers in use there, and it had been making a reduction of the pollution levels, but they hadn't been applying it to the geopathic stress zones. When it was applied to the geopathic stress zone, when we did the clearing, like I said, within 30 minutes, it was completely clear.
I mean, this is mind-blowing, really, I'm sure, to the average person, but I'm wondering if has there been any interest, to your knowledge, from any governmental agency?
Yes, quite a bit, actually. What they're waiting for is for somebody to be first. Everybody has said, well, is there somebody else that's willing to sponsor it? You know, and we've been told there was somebody in Brazil that came up to me. I did a workshop down there, and she said she was a member of their legislature, and she said, is there any other government that is sponsoring this yet? And I said, no, a lot are interested. She says, she says, as soon as somebody does, let me know. They want to do it.
Well, you know,
nobody wants to be the first one, you know.
If this is indeed true, and I trust what you're saying is true, this is a bigger story than anything going on in Washington right now.
Well, yeah, except people want the drama of what's going on in Washington.
Well, what do you think would happen if we took 10 or 12 of these things to Washington and strategically placed them?
Well, that's not a bad idea at all. Actually, you know, there are people working on that, and you just never can tell.
Well, I get the feeling that even without the government, that this is very much a grassroots movement.
You definitely don't need the government for this. The advantage of having the government is that you can place the units exactly where you want them, and you don't have to necessarily depend on it being in somebody's house. And sometimes the areas that have, well, oftentimes the areas that have very high geopathic stress are also the high crime areas, and also the areas that are slums or low economic development. And usually you don't have the people coming from those areas volunteering to participate in this program. So where you get people volunteering to participate in the more affluent areas, that isn't necessarily where the units need to be placed. So the advantage of having another agency,
Right.
whether it be the government or a corporation that comes in to sponsor that, is that you can place the units strategically where it's the best for the community and not just where somebody happens to live. But all of the results we've had so far have been through citizen movements. And in San Diego, we've seen a 60% reduction within the first 3 months of instituting the program down here with a group of 15 people. That's of carbon monoxide, ozone, and nitric oxide. 60% reduction. Now, when you look at the papers and the millions of dollars that they're spending on emission controls, that's producing at the most 10% reduction in pollution levels.
Right.
Over years.
Well,
We're talking within 2 months. In Mexico City, within 2 weeks, there was a 40% reduction.
Well, they probably would attribute it to something else, though, right?
No, because when you take the units away, the pollution goes right back up. We've seen that in numerous cases.
Well, it seems to be why you'd have to have some official recognition or test going on so they can officially monitor this and make sure nothing else is going on.
We have something lined up in Caracas, which is going to be monitored by one of the most prestigious and well-recognized scientific organizations in Venezuela, and that'll be in March, and that is going to be a three-phased program that will get that kind of recognition. And at that point, then governments and industry, it's actually industry that's more interested in anything, because if major polluters are able to clean up an area for almost pennies on the dollar, then that really behooves them financially and politically.
Oh, right. Yeah, go see the movie with John Travolta,
Right.
A Civil Action, which I saw.
Right, right. They paid $69 million to clean that up.
That's
well,
right.
You could do that for, under $15,000.
You think that would include the underground pollution as well?
Well, we don't have studies to show that, so we can't say.
It's a little
We're
tougher.
really trying to just stay on what we've observed so far. We aren't able to tell with that, but we have seen that the water has improved, the marine life in areas that have been horribly toxic. I mean, just absolutely horrible. It has improved dramatically. In Cape Cod, they had, within 3 months of instituting a program of only 5 harmonizers in the area, they had an increase of over 100 different kinds of marine life into the Cape, including first time ever dolphins and whales.
That's amazing. Can anyone just buy a harmonizer and start using it right away?
They can, and
without
it
any
will
training?
have effects on their immediate environment, on their house, on themselves.
Oh, really?
Because when we think of pollution, it's not. What is happening is that the field is one that is aligned with life.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the sacred geometries involved, it is a high life energy pattern. Now, the pollution is one of the byproducts of a chaotic or dead life energy pattern. But the other things that are affected are human emotions, stuck energy patterns in your own biofield, your own physical body, etc. With one harmonizer, one person would notice an effect on their household.
Christan, we have to take a break here. You're in the Millennium Cafe, and with me in the cafe is Christan Hummel, and we are working on clearing the world's pollution. And I forgot where we were before the break, but I was kind of wanting to tie this up because we only have a few more minutes. You work with devas and Slim Sperling and some of these other fellas work with these transitional tools they call the harmonizer. And I know you can go to the website and find out more, and you can actually order the harmonizer if you want to, right? Yeah. At earthtransitions.com. And I'm going to give out your phone number too, and that's 760-722-5555, and it's earthtransitions.com. So anyway, I understand that you work with devas more and they work with the transitional tools, but that at some level you don't need the tools.
That's correct.
Right? How does that work?
Well, what we've been finding is that the tool is there to essentially trigger our own memory of what we can do, a capacity that we have that we seem to have just forgotten. and that we've demonstrated many times in groups where we can actually do the very same thing without the tools, and that it's a very right brain kind of teaching. It's not as though you look at it and understand the mechanics and then suddenly go, okay, I can do this. There's just something about having connected with that, having seen the reality of this little ball of copper suddenly clear up pollution in front of your eyes, that it shifts your reality. That's all I can say about it. It just shifts your mindset about what's possible, and that the truth is we have powers far greater than any of these tools, even though they seem really miraculous in the beginning when you're working with them. And that's the point I really want to encourage, just want to share with the listeners, because that's where the real cutting-edge technology is within us. We have the capacity to change this dream we're dreaming anytime we want to.
You know, I've seen experiments. I know on Art Bell, he had an experiment where they had people pray to shift the weather in Florida when they had those terrible storms or fires down there, and right away it took effect. And I know I personally have had effects on the weather just by praying, so to speak. I have a special kind of prayer that I do. But just hold off the rain or whatever, for a few minutes so my son could ride his bicycle home from school. Or, I've always experimented, and I found it usually works if it's for the highest good of all. And I usually add that, and then I don't get in trouble.
Well, the devas have given us a lot of the techniques of working with clearing the geopathics by working with them. But what they told us at the end of all the techniques is the technique isn't important. It's something that acts as a lens.
It's the intention.
To focus your mind, that it's your love and your intent that's important.
Well, I want to thank you, Christan Hummel, for being with us here in the Millennium Cafe. And if you want to get a hold of Christan, go to the website, earthtransitions.com. I think you'll really enjoy it. I really spent a lot of time there before this show. So thanks again, Christan, for being here. And I know you're doing really great work.
Keep it up. Steve.
We need more people like you out there.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.